Hey everyone, Tim Weinzaffel here for Enterprise DNA, and in this video I want to show how you can incorporate a Power App directly into your Power BI report and make the two interactive together. Now, if you're not familiar with Power Apps or you haven't worked with them before, stick around because I really think this is going to be a real powerful capability and make you even excited to learn more about Power Apps. So let me go ahead and jump to a specific example. Okay, so I've moved over to just a simple Power BI report, and what you'll see here is it's just a simple table. I've got this is some sample property lease data, and what you'll see is I've got a column for lease ID, company name, lease manager, and so on. And in my report, what I have is I have this thing called comments. I have a section called comments. Now, in my data set, and again, it doesn't have to be this way, I have two different data sources. I have these first few columns here, all the way up to lease status is, an Excel file. Again, it could be other, data sources, but that's one data source with lease ID being a key field. And then what I've created to track my comments is a separate SharePoint list. So let's say in my example, I have a SharePoint list, and you'll see I've got a couple of comments here, lease ID 1 and 2. And if I go to it quickly, you'll see here's my SharePoint list that I've got created, and then I'm capturing them by the lease IDs, and there's my comments. And I can go ahead and I've got the two joined in my report so that as comments are added to that list, they get pulled into the report. And let's say, for example, I want to, I'm going to filter here to just 5 records. Let's say this is an example where I wanted to go out to my managers here, my lease managers, to provide comments, commentary on things they're responsible for. So let me take this one 116, where if I were to say, Brian, I want you to to update the status of things. I want comments here so that I can see them in my report. Maybe what they might do is go to the SharePoint list, go ahead and add a new record. I'll type 116, put in the date, choose today, and, comments added here. Nothing, and I can add an attachment. I'll skip that for now. So there, now I have it in my list. When I go to refresh my data source, then that comment would add up here. Now, this works fine. However, you can see obviously a couple of issues with it. One, it's not very efficient because it forces people to have to go switch between, different a report versus a list, have to know the lease ID. They have to type things in, so not very efficient. This is where Power Apps comes into play and can solve this problem. Now, you could have a separate Power App, and I've worked with where you could create some URL linking, where you could click on say the a URL, send them to the Power App where everything's pre-filled. But I don't want to do that. What I want is my Power App embedded into my report, so it can all be done here. And that's what I have. If I look over to the right here, I've got this other section. This is my Power App that I have built and then added to this. Now, you'll see right now it says select a record from the table to activate, and I've set that up, and I'll show that. And the reason I've done that is because for purposes of this app, I only want one record to be show at a time, and right now in my data set, I've got 5 records here. I've got all 5 of these. But now if I were to just click on this, so I've clicked on one record, that instruction, that note goes away, there's my Power App, and there are the same fields that are in my SharePoint list. So I can see lease ID, I can see 1129, and this is the comment that I just added not a few seconds ago, and there it is. Now, if I go to the next one, let's say I am Paul, and I want to add a comment here, I can just click on my record here, it updates to 118, action date is by default, it's being today, and I could add adding more notes here. And then I can add an attachment. I'm not going to do that, but I can go ahead and do that. Now, nothing updates in my report because I have to refresh the data, but what I have done is now that I have added that into my list. So if I were to go to, say, this next one, you see it updates as well. And if I go back, there is the information that I just added. And if I go back up to my list, I need to refresh it here. And there is the one I just added. But the beauty of it is that it's all being done in here, and just by clicking on my table and on my records will filter the specific record that I have in my app. So let's jump into specifically how I did this. Okay, so I moved over to Power BI Desktop, and let me go ahead and walk through what I did. Now I'm going to go a little bit quick, so feel free to pause and go back as needed. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in my visual, and that is right here. And let me go ahead and size that. And it'll size it, and there we go. Okay. The next thing you're going to do, first of all, just real quick too, you'll see that I've got 5 records. I filtered it so that 5 records show up, and I'll show why that is very helpful here. What it needs is your app, the visual needs data. Now what it needs is the field or fields that you want to be able to pass back and forth between your Power BI and the app itself. In my case, I only needed one, which was this lease ID field, which is this one right here. So I went ahead and did that, and it gives me the option to create a new one or choose one. In my case, I'm going to create a new one. So I'll do this, and it's going to go ahead and launch me into Power Apps. All right, so Power Apps opened, and what it did by default is it created a very simple app with a gallery. Now, what you'll notice, and again, I'm not going to go into the details of creating a Power App. I'm going to go focus specifically on what I did. But one thing I want to point out is, especially if you've worked with Power Apps before, is it adds in this Power BI integration, and you'll see up here PowerBIIntegration.Data. So in my gallery, under items, it is showing those 5 items, and these are just the lease ID. That's all that's being showed in here. So that is what's being passed over, and this becomes key. So I'm going to go ahead. What I don't want is this gallery, because I want a form. I just want to have that one simple form. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So I have my blank screen here. I'm going to go ahead and insert an edit form. And I need to connect to data. So my form, though, needs to connect to my SharePoint list, because that is where the data resides. It's this SharePoint list here. So let me go back there, and let me go ahead and connect to it. I'm gonna connect to my SharePoint list. And this is one that's already available, so I'll choose that. And then there is my list. So I'll do that, and I'll connect. Up in my form here, I'll go into the data. So I've connected to the data set, but I still have to connect it to my form. So I'll do that. And now it will populate, and you go ahead and it'll populate my simple form. And so I'm just going to do a real quick cleanup here. I'm going to change the attachments here, and I'm going to move the form down a little bit. Okay, going to do some real quick cleanup. I'm going to change this title again. This was in my SharePoint list. I'm going to rename this to Lease ID. It's just the label here. And then the keynotes, this by default, it's adding a single line. I want multi-line, so I'm just going to change that, and I can even resize it if I want. I'm not going to add any other graphics, just to keep moving through things. Okay, so now I've got, I'm going to reduce this here. I've got my screen and I've got my form added. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to connect the form items to the data. So I've clicked on the form. The data source is lease comments list. This is what I want, but I want to go back to the items. Now, if you'll remember, when I had the gallery, when the item was pulling in that Power BI integration, the data, I want to be able to sort of mirror that. But actually, I'm going to do something a little bit more. I'm going to add a little bit more to it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a lookup. and I'm going to use the lookup function, and I want to look up in my comments list the source, and then I'm going to where the title equals the first of my PowerBI integration.data. And then I'm going to add a period, and it gives me, this is the full data set, but I need to reference specifically the field, which is lease ID. And now if I do that, what it's doing is, let me go back to my form, is you'll see the 103 popped up. And what I'm trying to do here is I'm just basically using the lookup function in the list, and then I'm pulling in, so this PowerBI Integration.Data, again, this is, it's pulling in all of that data set that is in my Power BI report. Okay, so now I've got the item in my form. I've got the item. This is the property that I need here to attach this list. The next thing that I need to do quickly is I need to tell the form whether or not to be in edit mode or add in a new record. So let me explain this. If I were to go back to my property report, and I'm going to click on a different one here. What you'll notice is if I see this first one, lease ID number 2, has information here and there's comments. And if I go back to my list, there is already a record here. So if I were to click on this, I want this form, the mode, to be in edit because I want to be able to edit this. However, if I go to this number 3 here, there is no comments because there's no comment. You'll see here 1, 2, there's no 3. So now if I click on this, I actually want this to be in a new mode. And of course in the user, it looks the same both ways. But on the app itself, I need to be able to toggle that. So I'm going to jump back here. If I go to my form, and I've got the default mode is the property that I want. And by default, it goes into form mode.edit. I actually want this now to do I need a conditional statement, and let me go ahead and do this. I'm going to type this out and then I'll walk through it. I'm going to do a conditional statement, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the count rows, but what I want to do is I want to use the filter function, and where the title equals, and let me go ahead and type this out and I will walk through this. Okay, here's what I want to do. First of all, I want to filter I want to use the filter function. I want to filter the list where the title equals, when I'm saying here the first of the Power BI integration data, anytime I say Power BI integration.data, that is the data that is being pulled over from my Power BI report. So for example, I'm going to switch back to the report. If I were to, let me switch here, right now I have 5 records. There's 5 records showing. These 5 records, which it's these lease IDs, because that's all I'm sending over. That is what's being sent over to through this Power BI integration.data. So basically what I want to do is I want to basically telling it to say, look up the first one in that list, whatever's in that list, look it up, and look up in here where the first record, the least ID is. If you find it, and then count how many rows you find. Now, if you find one, that means that this count rows equals 1. That means there's a lease ID, there's a record in here. If that's the case, the form mode should be edit. That means that there's a 1. If you don't, if the count would be not 1, in fact it would be count would be 0, make the form mode edit, or I'm sorry, new. This is the function that I used to toggle between a new versus edit mode. And it became important as I was working through this. Now, two other things I want to do is, if it is a new record, I want to be able to have the value here, the lease ID, already pre-populated so that it doesn't have to be typed in. So I'm going to go ahead and I need to unlock this through the advanced. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this. And I want this, the default, and I can just change, I'm going to change the default property here to just be the first of Power BI integration data and then the lease ID. And that will automatically pull in the value here. And then my action date, I'm going to do something very similar here. I'm going to change the default date, and I'm just going to use the now function. So now I've addressed that. Now the last thing I need to do is address the issue of when more than one record is selected. So let me go back to my report. In my example here, there are 5 records showing, and I have this warning that pops up that tells the user you have to select one record in order for it to show. So let me show how I did that. And all I did there was I just added I'm going to add a rectangle. And I'm going to go ahead and just cover my form. And let me change that. And before I actually do that, real quick, one thing I forgot my submit button. So let me go ahead and do that. Let me go ahead and add in a button. And this is just my submit button. And this just will submit the form. So on select, I want to use the submit form function, and my form is form 1. And then I'm going to actually refresh my list as well. I'm going to add that just so it refreshes it. I've just taken care of that. So now I've got my button. So now I want to go back and I want to add the little warning box. So I'm going to include a rectangle. And I'm just going to cover the whole thing. Let me change it to white. And I'm going to add a label now. And I'll put that, and I'm just going to say, please select a record to activate. And now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group these. It'll make it easier when you'll see here in a second. And I'll just call that instruction box. Now, what I want to do is I want to hide or show the box, and that was the trick I used. So if I go to the visible, by default, the visible function is true, but if I change this to false, you see it goes away, and now I have access to the form. So what I want to do now is just add a quick conditional statement, and that conditional statement is, this one is quite simple. If I want to do the count rows function, basically what I'm saying is count the number of rows in that the Power BI integration data. If the number of rows equals 1, then I want the property to be false, because false means it does not show, and if it is, show it. Now, as soon as I put that in, it hides it, because if I go back to here, the number of rows in my data set is 5, because that, if you remember in the beginning here, when I created this form, there were 5 records that were selected in that when I started to create the app. And so right now that value equals 5. And so, but when someone just selects on one record, it will be 1, and then that'll hide it. So now I'm done with the form. I'm going to save this, give it a name, give it a name. I'm just giving it this name. I've saved it. And then the other thing you have to do is publish the app so it's now available, and that button is right here. I'm going to go ahead and publish this, and then I'm going to jump back over to my report, and I will head over there right now. All right, so back to my report. I'm going to toggle away, and then I'm just going to toggle back. This sort of refreshes things. It's now asking me again, do I want to choose an app or create one? Well, I've just created it, so I'm going to go ahead and choose it. And there it is, Test App 3. That's the one I just created. And let me add that. It's going to give me a few notes here. I'm just going to skip these. You do have to share it. I'm going to skip that for now. And there it is. Now I've got my app. I've got 5 records selected. Now remember, I've got 5 selected, so it's more than one. If I click on one, there it is, 121 by default, added 121. There's the action date by default. This is a new mode because there is no record in my list for this. But if I go to 103, here it is now, and then there it is. It'd be in edit mode, and we are good to go. So there it is. I know I realized I went a little bit quick, but make sure you kind of you look back through the video. But this is the way, one way that you can incorporate the app into your report. I hope you found this helpful. If so, I'd love to hear any comments that you have in the comments below. So thank you very much.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Enterprise DNA TV. If you enjoyed the content covered in this particular tutorial, please throw the video a like. It really helps us and we really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Enterprise DNA TV channel. We have a huge amount of content coming out all the time from myself and a range of content creators, all dedicated to improving the way that you use Power BI and the Power Platform. Lastly, check out Enterprise DNA's website, plenty of resources and further learning that you can access very easily. All the best. Take care.